But this is a really interesting article. The purpose: use yours to focus activity and motivate staff. Leadership starts with that purpose, and we've heard lots written about the purpose-driven school, and there are writers that have said a great deal about purpose-driven activity. But this article really underscores this critical issue in educational leadership, the detrimental impact of poor management. And in fact, when it just is management, I'm directing people to do the things that I want them to do, rather than setting that tone of effective leadership. Where there's lots to be said about distributed leadership, about having others leading particular areas. We come back to this idea of the indigenous populations, where their idea of leadership is, well, what do you need to do, and I'll tell you who the expert is in that area. And that's how tribal leadership works. There's no top person of everything. There is someone who's giving leadership, but they are respecting the leadership capacity of others within the community. So this is a really interesting article by Neil Jerd, OBE, and his book, the leadership book, and he's founded this platform called the Leader Connect. But it's all about that idea of creating a culture of leadership beyond just top tier. So everybody has a responsibility to lead, and they're leading because they're an expert in their field. So look, if you're reading this article, there's some really important questions. If you're a leader, what strategies have you found most effective in preventing poor management from impacting staff morale and retention? I mean, that we know that's the biggest impact on people leaving an organization, not because they want something else, is because they're dissatisfied with the way that they've been led, and maybe it's the way they've been managed or micromanaged or mismanaged. That's a big question within stability, and leadership characteristics are those that keep people with you. How do you ensure that leadership development opportunities are accessible to all staff? That's a big question, not just the chosen few, but that all staff have the capacity to develop the leadership skills. Now, obviously, there are some that have no intention of wanting to be leaders outside of their classroom, but there are people who have got leadership capacity, and they should be encouraged to grow that. One of the things that we do within Smart Curriculum often in our conversation is about developing vision and purpose statements. What and how does that leadership purpose, how does those values and visions that are often stuck up around the wall, how do those translate into practice in the school? How are you using that? I've said several times that element of, I was working with a head teacher who'd got 21st century education clearly written on the wall in his office and on the corridors as you walked along them. And I asked the question, how does that translate 21st century education into the classroom? Because I just walked past a design technology and food rooms and art rooms that look to come out of the Victorian age. And I'd say, how do the children engage with that 21st century mission against what they're actually experiencing? Now, that's not to say that they necessarily had the money to replace the DT workshop with a new modern design technology room, but there are some things that they could do in terms of their ambitions. How do you empower your staff to take initiative and innovate within the structure of your school? So how are staff given that capacity to develop innovative practice rather than just simply compliant practice because there's a view of how it must be done? Allowing staff the freedom to develop and innovate is a key development and a key issue in retention. Feedback and collaboration is key. What systems do you have in place to regularly gather and act on feedback from your staff, so their perspective of what's going on. And now getting away from the constant complaining, it's not this and we haven't got that, finding the quick wins, finding those things that are going to impact people and make a difference is really key. Resource allocation, it is fair and it's distributed with an understood system is so key. I mean, I found that when, I was in leadership, that people knew why one department got more money than another, because it was related to the number of children that you were impacting. Now, there are some departments that require more money because it's more costly. If you go to a music department, some of the instruments are expensive, and having the capacity to deliver music really makes a difference. But a fair distribution and an understood distribution system is really important. That's a characteristic of leadership. We are on the table. How do we promote an inclusive culture if we don't talk about it and we don't lead it? The values start with our behavior. It's not what you say, it's what you do. So how does your behavior lead inclusion? And that makes a difference to people in the school. I've talked about before this whole thing about staff well-being. We lead well-being in everything that we do. And there's big conversations at the moment around timetabling for well-being. How do we facilitate all of those journeys for staff that are not unfair? They're not just based on, well, I'll do it for my friends or the people that are compliant within the system, but there is an equitable system across the staffing. There are questions around what methods have you found most effective in strengthening the relationship between your school and the wider community. We had that conversation with Matt Pittman from Australia with his book, The Connection Curriculum. It's all focused on that. What are we doing to engage community in that social ethic and that social contract? I was talking to a school leader this morning who was saying about the need to get schools engaging in that social contract with their community. And, we're not going to get the attendance of a school up if the community are not buying into that education system. So community engagement is a leadership question. What are we doing to set the tone and set the agenda? I said yesterday to somebody that, we can't see AI as the answer to everything. It is brilliant. It is giving us it's opening doors to questions, but technology integration is a question that we need to ask, but it's not going to have the answer to everything. How do you evaluate which new technologies are worth adopting to enhance both teaching and administrative process? That's the question to ask. But then look at the quick wins. What can we do to make quick changes? What can we do to make life easier? But then the deeper questions of what's sustainable technology, what's going to make a difference over time. Look, this is a great article to start the questioning. I'd read it with that in mind. There needs to be discussion. There needs to be deeper work done around the school. And it's not just about knee jerk. It's about embedding practice that's going to make a difference and make the job much more rewarding. I think go back 40 years when I started, it was a really rewarding job. It's got difficult over the years and it is becoming more difficult now. If we're serious about retaining staff, we need to lead, and we need to lead with some of these questions that go through the system. It's a great place to begin. Commend the article to you. It's a great resource. Leader Connect, get involved there. But what we're doing and the conversation I'm having here is about how smart curriculum can support that narrative, and we certainly do.